Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be on my feet this evening and entering into debate on the budget that's been presented for this year. On concluding my remarks, I will just notify that I will not be supporting the motion put forward in favour of this budget, but will be supporting the amendment put forward by the member for Regina Rosemont. And before I get into the more substantive remarks that I've prepared for this debate, I do want to start by thanking my constituents and my constituency assistant for continuing to put their faith and confidence in me, and just for the wonderful community that they are, and the great honor that it is to represent them here in the legislature. It's been such a wonderful opportunity these past 18 months, however long it's been in this role, and certainly it's one that I couldn't do without the capable assistance of my constituency assistants, Carrie Schaefer. We've been having such an incredible time as we've been learning our roles, developing new skills, finding ways to work together and serve the people of our constituency. Carrie is such a delight to work with. She has a wonderful sense of humor. She's always up for a new challenge and really cares deeply for the people of our community and in serving their needs and ensuring that they are receiving the services that they need, and helping to navigate the system and ensure that whatever problems arise, that we're there to advocate on their behalf. And I really, truly could not do this work without her able assistance. And so I do want to start with that acknowledgement and deep show of appreciation for all that she does for us in our constituency of Saskatoon-Utana. And although it's been difficult through the pandemic to engage in a really close and extensive way with constituents, I've still really valued all of the many tremendous opportunities to meet with constituents and attend events, whether those are citywide or within the community. Saskatoon-Utana is such a vibrant community, whether it's the Fringe Festival in the summertime, the many events in appreciation of arts and culture in our community, the upstanding role that members of our business community play in ensuring that we're taking care of one another. People really, truly care about one another in Saskatoon-Utana and have really stepped up as leaders in so many ways throughout the pandemic, and it's truly an honor to represent them and serve here on their behalf in the legislature, bringing forward member statements and petitions that they've worked and put their heart and soul into, and being able to represent them in those ways is also something that I find a great honor to do. And so, as I turn my mind to this budget and I think about the manner in which it impacts the people of Saskatoon-Utana and indeed the entire city of Saskatoon and the rest of the province, whether that's in rural Saskatchewan, northern Saskatchewan, southeast Saskatchewan, rural, urban, it just across the piece. So many people are struggling. They're really struggling, finding it hard to make ends meet, and we're really looking for positive signs in this budget that would give them some hope about what might be in store for them in their future. And I have to say, it was rather disappointing to see the numerous ways in which this budget has let people down. From tax increases on a whole range of items, which I'll get into in a moment, or the lack of funding for crucial programs, whether in the areas of health, education, social services. We really just have been so greatly disappointed. And it's an interesting phrase that the government side has taken for budget, and in terms of back on track. And you know, it's an interesting analogy, because you think of the obvious children's story of the little engine that could. And in that story, of course, we all know that there is a train that's filled with toys and goodies for the good girls and boys on the other side of the mountain. And so this train is broken down on the side of the train tracks, and is looking for somebody or some locomotive to take it over the mountain to the other side, where it can deliver those toys and goodies to the good children. And so the first locomotive comes along, and the little train says to the big locomotive, "Oh, will you help me get across to the other side of the mountain?" And this big, grand locomotive says, "Well, I'm far too important to take the likes of you over the mountain. I have to go on and do more important work and take care of other bigger, more grander trains, so I won't help you." And the little train's getting more worried, and the next train comes along, and this one is a very pompous train that feels that it's far too important to be concerned with the likes of this little train full of toys and goodies for the good little children across the mountain, and says, "No, I have more important work to do, so I'm not going to help you." And then the next train comes along. This time, it's this old, beleaguered locomotive, and it takes a look at this little train full of all these goodies, and it says, I'm too old and frail to take you over the mountain to the good little boys and girls." And so this train is really at a loss until finally, there's the little engine that comes along to help it across. And as I think about that story and the moral that it's telling to us, and how it relates to getting back on track, what I really see here is a government that feels it's too grand. We heard the Minister for Social Services the other day talk about how, well, we only have so much money, you can only go so far, so sorry, but the rest of you are just going to have to suffer. And I think that whether it's a government that feels it's too grand, too pompous, or just too old and frail, it hasn't shown any interest in addressing the needs of the people of Saskatchewan. People who, according to the Angus Reid poll, indicate are really suffering. Let me just share a little bit of that polling information. So right now in Saskatchewan, 51% of households are carrying too much debt, and 39% couldn't manage an unexpected cost of $1,000. That would just break them. They suffer from job insecurity, and debt remains a major source of stress for them, with 35% struggling. And low-income households in particular face huge challenges and are losing hope. They're concerned about rising interest rates, and 48%, that's almost half of Saskatchewan residents, find their living situation tough or very difficult. And so when we see a budget here before us that isn't taking into account the fear and the stress, the concern that people are feeling about their ability to provide for themselves and their families, people experiencing the second lowest minimum wage in the country. In Saskatoon, an average income of $40,000. And now to be hit with more taxes, 6% PST on a whole range of things that, as we're coming out of this pandemic, people really rely on. They're looking for an opportunity to be together with other people and enjoy going to things like the zoo or to fairs and rodeos and trade shows and arts and crafts shows, even to the gym to stay well. And now they're facing higher costs, a higher tax burden. This government is expecting them to, bear the burden of at a time when they've had to endure so much, and really they should be given a break, not an extra burden. But it's not only that. It's not that now we have the PST being applied to a range of outings and events, but also we're seeing the property tax hiked on residential properties, on agricultural properties. We've seen the commercial and industrial property tax increased as well. We see it on tobacco and on vaping products. And so at a time when people are looking for assistance in coming out of this pandemic, what has this government done? It's made life harder. At a time when people are already feeling under stress and the burden of the cost of living and inflation rate that was recently reported at 5.7%. It's at a 30-year high. And you see that stress. You see that on the street. People are on edge. You don't see the same kind of relaxed nature of people when you meet them in the grocery store or on the street. Road rage is really becoming, more pronounced, and it's because of these financial pressures with increasing debt, the highest mortgage arrears in the country, and so it's a really hard time. And unfortunately, this government is out of touch with these realities. And we listen to these arguments on, we're having to, move towards, a balanced budget, and these are the choices that we've had to make. But I think it really talks about priorities, and the things that people value are what this government values over, the lives of ordinary Saskatchewan people who are having such a hard time making ends meet. And, oftentimes part of the justification we hear from the other side of the Assembly is that, under an NDP government, things would be far worse. And yet. I mean, it's funny how your clock, kind of starts and ends at times that conveniently leave out the disgraceful history of your predecessors in government here. And I remember those days. I remember those days well. I grew up in this province. I lived through the 80s. I lived through the Devine government when they added $14 billion to the debt at a time when there were massive tax cuts and giveaway grants on programs that, were regressive, and there were handouts. They were putting money in the hands of people that wasn't addressing where the true needs were. Not only that, you had Nepotism abounded in terms of, who was getting hired. You had, and at the end of it, you had 16 criminal convictions, 14 MLAs, including 8 cabinet ministers, under what the RCMP titled Operation Fiddle. Isn't that an interesting name? 14 MLAs and 2 party workers charged with fraud. That's the legacy of this government. And so, it's rather, not only that, not only were these criminal convictions of fraud by your predecessors, if you want to go back, let's go back. But not only that, you saddled us with the debt so that when we had finally a responsible government in power in the 90s, under the NDP, under Romano and Calvert, we had to fix the mess that your predecessors created. So don't ever forget that when you want to talk about the hard choices that our government had to make when you left us in such a horrible, horrible state. And, they were hard choices, whether it was in terms of highways and hospitals and services having to be rationalized and bring our bank rating back up. I mean, we were literally almost on the verge of bankruptcy as a province. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget that reality. And so when you left us in such a state and we had to bring it back from the brink so that families could continue to ensure their children had a good education and access to health care, something that has been so sacred in this province. Let's remember where that came from. And I think, when I think about the values of our party and how it's rooted in ensuring that there is equality and justice and that people's basic needs are being met. We're not making a bargain here where people are left on the side of the road, where they're meant to have, such a disgraceful lack of dignity through a revamped SIS program with a $30 increase in this budget. It's disgraceful. There's a few other things I wanted to say, and thank you all for the encouragement. I will continue with my remarks. So I thought maybe it might be interesting just to sort of read into the record some of the comments that some different organizations have made about this budget. And I think one of the things that for me was extremely disappointing was the fact that Prairie Harm Reduction, third year in a row, did not receive funding. That organization is doing such critical work in the Saskatoon area at a time when, we have the highest rates of mental health and suicide and overdoses from drug use. And Kayla DeMong is the new executive director for that facility, and certainly she was disappointed and was hoping for something different. And I feel really badly for that organization, knowing how the great work that they do. They're such an innovative organization and really deserve adequate sustaining funding for the services they provide. And we hear about how vital CBOs are to the delivery of social services, those with mental health and addictions. And certainly I can't think of a more deserving organization. I really can't. I think it's absolutely shameful that they've been denied funding again. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? We have Mark Von Shelwitz, the Vice President for Western Canada with Restaurants Canada, said that he even points out the fact that the budget doesn't exactly address affordability for people. And so it doesn't really do much as far as helping consumers with those rising costs. And so I guess, he's pointing out the fact that hospitality industry, a number of these taxes are really going to be a disincentive for people to get out and participate. Tim Reid, the president and CEO of Regina Exhibition Association Limited, or REAL, I guess as they're more commonly known. What did he have to say? He said that the last 2 years have been the darkest time in the industry has ever faced. This change will impact business operations and entertainment goers, the significance of which needs to be fully understood. So, not really. And I guess the other thing about this was that, this was coming as a surprise and a shock. Not, there wasn't any consultation. That at least we never heard of any when the questions were asked today in question period. And so they're really feeling blindsided by these measures. Todd McKay, the Prairie Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, said he's disappointed because there is no tax relief for taxpayers. And adding the new PSD on some services is an irritant. It's like sticking it to taxpayers on that one. And then, of course, you know how the Saskatchewan Rough Riders feel about the new tax on ticket sales. As a non-profit sports team, and despite rising inflation costs, we work tirelessly to minimize the financial impact on our fans. Unfortunately, we know today's decision will impact many in our community. Those are just a few of the quotes that I wanted to include in my remarks. I mean, this has been a budget that I think has been widely panned as uninspired, as out of touch, and one where we're not ensuring that as we come out of this pandemic, that people's hopes and fears are being adequately addressed. And I think that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. And as I wrap up my remarks on this, is that, whether it's the little engine that could and our little train that's trying to make it over the mountain, to reward all the good little boys on the other side, and you think about that as all the good people of Saskatchewan. That this is a government that doesn't care. It's either thinks it's too grand, too pompous, or too old and frail. I'm not sure which of these it is. But certainly, I think it's time for a change, and this budget has certainly shown us that really you guys are out of ideas and you're out of touch. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.